This story I've never been able to tell as good, and we've discussed it a couple times, but I know you did a piece on it, and I want you to explain it to the audience. It is the Mongol Empire going against the Russians when they first invaded Russia, and how they fucked. Like, Russia was just like, what the just happened? Yeah. And then how much PTSD it caused for a long period of time.
For the invasion into the Kievan Rus. Okay, so here's the thing. Before Russia was ever Russia, in the first place, it was divided into a number of different principalities. These are the Kievan Rus peoples, the majority of which the leadership is actually based off of Scandinavian origin. So it was the Vikings, specifically the Swedes, who had come in and had largely taken over large regions of the Slavic territories and then taken control, creating their own little principalities of ruling elite. So you, technically speaking, had a Grand Prince of Kiev. And the whole thing was a loose federation where you had all these varying different principalities that technically owed allegiance to the Grand Prince, but for all intents and purposes, they were basically independent kingdoms. The Mongols roll in after their conquest, and they sweep across the steppe. The thing about the principalities is that they never had to deal with any kind of actual threat from the east, because who the fuck would go through Siberia? No one would ever do anything like that. But the greatest problem that they, armies had to face at that time was logistics. And with the Mongols, they didn't have to fucking worry about that, because all of their supplies they just took with them because they could live off of horses. It was the standard for a Mongol warrior that you were able to live off of mare's blood and milk. So they would actually get a large part of sustenance on the march, specifically from the blood and milk of the horses upon which they rode.
No wonder Demo Matt's so jacked.
Yeah.
And mare's blood and milk.
Horse milk? Yes. And not only that, people think, okay, so you're going to bleed your horse for sustenance. That's going to weaken it over time. Yes, but each Mongol warrior was expected to have at least 3 spare mounts. And at least, there were many that would have a dozen. So you're talking about, you have a horde of 10,000 warriors leading with them like 100,000 horses.
Sorry, I'm going to sidetrack you, but does this have anything to do with the origins of the mythology of vampires? Because it sounds like it might.
No, that's a whole thing. Okay. That's a whole thing with Transylvania. So
sorry, I just heard blood-sucking horde that shows up
invite the horse into your house.
No, completely different story.
Never.
So they would subsist off of it because they would raid, pillage, and the problem is that no one could use burnt or scorched earth tactics against them because they moved so fast that they would reach a place before they had a chance to actually burn supplies. So they would take whatever it is that they wanted in the first place. You couldn't really scorch earth against them. So the Mongols move in, and the tactic that they simply had was basically surrender to us, or not only will you die, the land itself dies. That they would burn every single thing to the ground.
This is where salt, that is where that statement came from. They're like, we're fucking.
No, that came from the Romans. And that came from the Romans because the fall of Carthage, the quote from Scipio Africanus, the conqueror of Africa, was that they would salt the earth so that Carthage would never rise again.
No shit. Okay.
So Carthage, like northern Tunis, this was a very fertile region in the first place. They salted the earth so that a rival could never pop up there again. Because that was, for almost the entirety of Rome's history, until the rise of the Parthians and other peoples to the east, there was never a challenger like Carthage in Roman history. And they guaranteed that wouldn't happen by destroying the possibility of any rival in the land that they took.
Nick, thank you for this.
Yeah, I told you.
Thank you.
So that's where that comes from.
I pick good podcasts.
So the Mongols move in, and because of how fast they move, they conquer everything. The nobles end up rallying under specific leaders because the way that they work is they rule under boyars. Boyars being the equivalent of a knight, count, duke, etc. It's a local lord that is the one that controls the serfs, and they lead forces into battle, whatever. It's generally pretty small armies, but led by these local elite retinues. They don't have a strong mercenary or middle class or anyone that can actually stand up to them in comparison to what you typically see in places like England or others. So the boyars go in and they attack the Mongol encampment. The Mongols initially retreat, and then the boyars,
yeah, I love this.
Greedy little fucks that they are, decide, hey, These Mongols have been looting and pillaging and burning and taking everything for this entire duration, so their camp is absolutely stacked with loot. We're going to start taking stuff from it because now it's all these riches that we're going to be able to enrich ourselves with. Mongols double back, encircle them, do a counterattack, wipe out the entirety of the boyar elite. And at that point, it breaks pretty much all resistance.
This is their entire military.
Basically, their entire military from here. They can rally around several other princes that try to raise forces in here, but they don't have an actual strong class of warrior to draw from besides the boyars. The greatest strength, defensive strength that they ever had was the fucking environment, and the Mongols just completely skip past that in the first place because it doesn't matter for them, and they start conquering everything. They burn every single... So they go to Kiev, and they burn it to the ground. They burn every single city that they come across if they don't immediately surrender.
Yeah.
And the whole point is if they surrender, the local elites are allowed to stay in charge. They're allowed to keep their local customs. The only thing that they have to do is they have to pay a tax, basically, to the Mongols and also give them men for their armies.
Literally worship whatever god you want. Do you? Because Genghis Khan, as his, is like, I just want every god or anyone to be happy with what I'm doing.
Correct. So they do all that, and they just move on and on and on and on. It gets to a point that they've conquered pretty much the entirety of Kievan Rus, and then something happens. And this is what always ends up happening, ends up stopping the Mongols. The Khan dies. So the problem is that when the Great Khan dies, they have I can't remember the exact name, it's like a kulatai. It's something along those lines, where it's essentially a semi-democratic process where the great war leaders...
Semi-democratic, where the toughest guy gets to rule next.
Pretty much. Pretty much.
And female in this time, which is crazy, is female had a lot of power.
They did.
A lot of fucking power.
So they would all go back to Karakorum, which that would be the one permanent settlement established in Mongolia. And from there, they would vote for who is going to be the next Khan if a heir had not already been designated. And so this means that the majority of forces were left. And the Khanate, the Great Khan Empire, then splits into multiple parts, where you have what ends up controlling large parts of Eastern Europe there at that point is the Golden Horde, under a descendant of Genghis Khan. And for the next 100-odd years, the Golden Horde is essentially the kingpin of the entire region of just steppe nomads living around northern Crimea, going into Ukraine and others that if you don't pay us, we're going to come in and burn all your shit to the ground. Until under Muscovy, which, recognize the name? Muscovy, Moscow. The Grand Prince of Muscovy ends up uniting all the varying peoples and then is able to take the fight to the steppe nomads and drive out the Golden Horde. And from there, that is what establishes the state of Muscovy that would eventually form Russia.